welcome everybody. This is our first learning journey focused on microgrants. And I'd like to welcome Annie Garrett and Carla Birnbaum, some of my old colleagues from Atlanta Federation, who have agreed to talk with us today about how they've used microgrants in a couple of different ways. One is to really drive behaviors of organizations around supporting children with disabilities in the education programs. And the second, which Carla will speak to, Annie's going to speak to the first, Carla will speak to, is really driving engagement in neighborhoods around Jewish activities. But they're going to give you a lot more detail about what they've been doing. It's been very exciting. I just wanted to let you know, Annie's going to go first, and Annie is the Director of Planning at the Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta, and Carla is their Relational Engagement Manager. So just a few rules of the road as we go. Everyone but the presenters is on mute, and both Carla and Annie will give a brief presentation and then entertain questions which you need to put into the chat. No one will be able to ask questions directly. We're going to monitor all the questions through the chat. And if you're not familiar with that, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there'll be a chat button that you can click on and then type in to everyone whatever your question is, and we'll review those. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Annie.
Hi, everybody. It's 3 o'clock here. I guess it's your lunch hour there. Nice to meet you guys. I am Annie Garrett. I am, as Amy said, the Director of Planning here at the Atlanta Federation. I recently moved into this role. Previously, I was the manager of what we called our Jewish Abilities Alliance, a disability inclusion initiative that worked to equip our community agencies with the capacity, support, expertise and skills to welcome and include people with disabilities, as well as increasing the awareness and the knowledge in the community of people with disabilities and the barriers they face engaging in Jewish life. We launched a microgrant program in 2019. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'll start by giving you just a little bit of history on how and why we launched that program. And are y'all able to see my screen? Great. So I stepped into this role actually in late 20, let's see, right before we launched the microgrants. So around that time, JAA, Jewish Abilities Alliance for short, had just done a total professional team restructure, had just completed a 3-year plan, for the first time outlining getting some strategies to paper on the work that we do and outlining a plan to accomplish those goals and benchmarks to reach. And so one of my first steps in my role with JAA was to really kind of assess the initiatives, the services that we did offer to the community. Did they align with our new 3-year plan? Did we need to make any sort of tweaks or, recalibrate our programs to better meet the needs of the community? So what existed at the time, the grant funding that we offered at the time, was specifically around learning resource specialists in preschools and religious schools in our community. And these were to fund, the staffing expense for an expert in disability inclusion to support the learning needs and the strategies implemented in those spaces. It was very limited to that early childhood and religious school space. After kind of doing an analysis, meeting with some of the grantees and the recipients, I really, our team realized that the funding was not always being utilized in the intended way. Oftentimes, we know there's staffing shortages, much worse now than there were then, but the LRS, the Learning Resource Specialist, would get pulled in as a sub, or maybe stepping out of the classroom with a child who maybe experiencing some, behavioral outburst in the classroom. And so not really fulfilling that intended role, moving the needle forward in inclusion. So we decided to just take a step back and readdress how we offer this financial support to the community through microgrants. And so what we did is we launched what we called our inclusion microgrants. These were for up to $1,500 to kickstart a disability inclusion initiative. And we intentionally left it kind of broad and open and vague. And we really wanted the community to drive the projects that we funded, the ideas and the innovation to kind of bubble up from the community rather than us putting forth, sort of a set of programs or initiatives to choose from. So when we developed our microgrants in 2019, the goals were to make our Jewish community more inclusive, accessible, and welcoming. And we specifically wanted to make sure we were reaching not just those formal Jewish spaces, but also those informal in-between spaces. Places that we may not always think about when we think of Jewish community, not just the synagogue and the school, but also sort of the other programming that was bubbling up in our community. We also wanted to, we knew that our LRS funding was only reaching that young early childhood age range, which is a critical age range when it comes to disability inclusion. But we also knew that there were adults and teens and lots of other ages that could be impacted by funding. And we also, wanted to step forward and offer an avenue for piloting new and innovative ideas so that, maybe Jewish Atlanta would come up with the next new innovative idea in disability inclusion that could then be replicated elsewhere. And we wanted these projects to be scalable and replicable. So if it was successful in one partner, it could be successful for others. So we, and I should say this third goal that I've listed, a tool to foster or incentivize engagement, that really was actually a goal we kind of backed into. We didn't put forward the microgrant program with the intention of using it as an engagement tool, but ultimately it became one of our best engagement tools. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. So since 2019, we have funded 63 microgrant projects at a total of about $60,000. The projects could be up to $1,500 each, and they, range. We kind of anticipated everybody would ask for the $1,500, but what we found in reality is that's not the case. Sometimes it was a very impactful $300 or a very impactful $1,000. We fund, as I said, programs or projects that create a more inclusive Jewish Atlanta. What we won't fund is staffing costs through a microgrant because $1,500 won't get you very far with staffing. It's not sustainable. And so we didn't see this as a good use for investment in staffing. Must be a Jewish communal partner, someone within our Jewish ecosystem. And we wanted it to be really low barrier. So we know that our smallest community synagogues may not have a development person or professional grant writer on their team, or the grassroots Jewish nonprofit that was forming may not have a development team. And so we wanted it to be a low barrier application. Also, we were only granting $1,500. They shouldn't have to write like a dissertation to get that. Same with the reporting and sort of the data that we expected back. We wanted to know about impact. We wanted to know a little bit of data, but mostly in the form of tell us your impact stories. Give us quotes of who's benefited. Tell us, how, for example, the educators in your classroom have seen changes throughout the course of the year thanks to this project. And then we also saw it as a really excellent project to engage our committee and allow them to provide that oversight. We had a very robust committee of about 15 lay leaders, and this was a really great opportunity for them to dive into the community, what the community was doing, learn what the community's needs were, help us evaluate the microgrant proposals, and then go do site visits with us, or help evaluate how we can replicate and scale the successful projects. And so it became a really amazing committee engagement tool. So since 2019, I mentioned we funded 63 projects, and I have a little bit of a pie graph here just to kind of categorize what those projects are. You see most of them are supplies and materials, and I'm going to give you a few more examples in a minute, but that would be literally the tangible things you need to make a place inclusive, make a space inclusive, make a program inclusive, the equipment or the materials you need to do that. A portion of our projects were programs, launching new programs to serve the disability community or engage the disability community. Accessibility projects, things like wheelchair ramps, door buttons, and then also some training and professional development opportunities. So just a little more detail about those examples. We have funded several of our community events accessibility needs through microgrants. So closed captioning, um, um, ASL translation services, and we did a accessible shuttle bus for our kosher barbecue festival. We've done a couple projects that foster employment skills. So at our camps for kids with teens with disabilities, we helped fund and one of them a farm stand where the teens in the inclusion program could work on employment skills while at camp doing camp programming. And I kind of covered most of these on the last slide, but consulting fees, one of our community partners ultimately closed down their inclusion program because it wasn't financially sustainable. So then we funded them bringing in a consultant for a temporary time to help them re-strategize and say, okay, we closed this program, but now what's our responsibility? What's next? And then community awareness programs. And then a popular one has been flexible seating in the classrooms. That's kind of a trendy thing, and an impactful thing in classrooms for diverse learners to have, not be sort of expected to sit in a hard plastic chair all day and meet all their learning goals, but rather have that flexibility within the classroom to move around and get the sensory input they need to learn and be regulated. So a couple pictures just because they're fun to show you kind of the scale of things we funded. On the left is an example of that flexible seating. You can see two kiddos there sitting in flexible seating, and that's in a day school environment. A lot of our day schools really took advantage of that flexible seating opportunity, and it was really, I think, beneficial. On the right is an early childhood program. We funded a lot of sensory enrichment projects at early childhood centers throughout our Jewish community to meet the needs of students who have crave and need that sensory input, or who to foster social skills through that sensory play. And I see a great question here. Was a single program broken down into categories of, so a single program would be something that would, for example, actually on my next slide, I have a great example. This holobake on the right. A single program would be something like where our community friendship circle partnered with one of our community Moishe House programs to create a inclusive program where young adults from Moishe House and young adults from Friendship Circle came together to host a program, bring friends, have a holobake together. And so that would be an example of a program. Funding an existing program that then, was expanding and opening their doors to a more diverse range of individuals with disabilities. And then on the left is that wheelchair accessible bus from the Kosher Barbecue Festival I mentioned. A couple more examples on the left. This is a Shook program at RJCC where teen campers with disabilities ran the store or the shop, the snack stand that opened a couple times throughout the week, and they had the responsibility of staffing it, of running it, of managing it, interacting with campers. And so we were really thrilled with this program and how successful it was. And then on the right, some of you may recognize Pamela Schuler. She's a little bit of a celebrity in the disability community. She does public speaking about her experience as a woman with a disability growing up in Jewish life. And one of our partners brought her in. So we always also love funding these community awareness programs that, programs like that aren't to provide a service for the individual with a disability, but rather to engage the whole community in a dialogue about disability inclusion and, broaden the understanding of our community and the needs that people with disabilities face engaging in Jewish life. So the impact of our microgrants, obviously each program impacted the agency we funded in many, many ways. We saw many of them increase their numbers of individuals served with disabilities, increase the breadth and depth of their programs through the funding we provided. But what we really, the sort of side benefit and maybe the ultimate benefit to the microgrants we offer was the impact on the larger community, sort of what the impact, all those projects added together, what they've done for our community. And so we really saw increased opportunities for collaboration. We, as the grant grantors, when we would see two similar projects bubbling up at the same time, often paired those agencies together to learn from each other, collaborate, maybe save some money by purchasing supplies together or purchasing equipment together. There was a time when a lot of the proposals we got were around sensory rooms, sensory spaces, and materials. And so we saw a real opportunity to bring all of those grant recipients together to learn as sort of a cohort. So we developed a mini cohort within that round of grantees to learn together about effective implementation of sensory spaces and sensory tools in a collaborative training opportunity. I mentioned this as our goal, our third goal that we kind of backed into, that deepened engagement with Jewish Abilities Alliance. What we learned is that this was almost a carrot. There were partners in the community that we knew there was real potential to do some great work with them, but disability inclusion may not have been high on their agenda because they had staffing shortages. They had other critical needs that they, felt were high priority, and it was kind of hard for us to slide in that agenda. And so this really offered us the opportunity to say, we have $1,500 for you to implement a great project. And by doing that, we'd also love to come in and train your whole staff on disability inclusion best practices. Or if we're funding, say, flex seating for your classroom, we'd love to come in and provide you training on how to best utilize flex seating in your classroom most effectively, safely, and according to best practice. So it really allowed us that engagement, that opening for deeper engagement. And sometimes we actually required that. We added that as a stipulation and said, by giving you this grant funding, we expect that we will schedule a training with you this semester. And so that was really an excellent benefit. And that always snowballed into deeper and deeper, they kind of could see what we could bring to the table and then wanted more. So that was always really great. I mentioned expansion and replication was really our intent. So we saw many of the programs, because they're microgrants and often piloting programs, we did expect some to succeed and some would not succeed. Especially early on, there were some that were one and done kind of programs. We learned, the partner learned, it was successful, but we learned how to better offer that type of program in the future and make it more impactful. Again, we've made more spaces and programs that are inclusive of people with disabilities. We've seen in some of our partners an increase of engagement. And then maybe most importantly, I think our microgrants ultimately led to increased awareness in our community. Often members, at least I can only speak for the Atlanta community, because they don't see individuals with disabilities coming to their synagogue services, they think there aren't Jews in Atlanta with disabilities. Well, we know that's not true. Typically, if they're unaffiliated, or they may not feel comfortable or welcomed, or they may not physically be able to access the services or participate in the services. And so we took the approach of working with partners, utilize this funding that even if you don't have a congregant with a who utilizes a wheelchair, consider putting a wheelchair ramp in your building, because you don't know who's not coming to your doors because they can't get in. It's also such a sort of demonstration to the community of our investment and inclusion, and your synagogue's investment and inclusion. And it is literally a visual welcoming at your doors that says this is an important aspect of our community. So we've really seen that increased awareness over time as well through this microgrant funding. So that in a nutshell, is how we utilized our JAA microgrants. And I should mention that we continue to offer those microgrants every year. We offer a fall and a spring cycle. We find that camps usually can't think about taking on a new project in the spring because they're ramping up, and so fall is better for them. And the schools, it's the opposite. They can't think in the fall about taking on a new project. They got to get the school year underway. So a split cycle works well for our community. We also recently, just this year, launched large scale grants because we have been able to develop a fundraising model for the JA over the past few years, so have more funding to offer to the community. And so we have seen, this is our very first round. We haven't even actually announced to the community who's receiving a grant, a large scale grant this year. We just got it approved today by the board. But we will be, we've seen some projects that have started in sort of that pilot phase of micro grants and grown over time. And we're now able to fund the agency through a large scale grant to expand. And a great example of that is that JCC Shook that I showed you a picture of. That's been a really successful and popular program at their camp. And so this upcoming year, this fiscal year, they will be developing their cafe space that's built into the main, they call it Main Street at our JCC, the main lobby area. They'll be working collaboratively with our local Jewish Family and Career Services to offer a vocational training program there for adults with disabilities. And we are providing a large scale grant to help develop that program. So that's sort of how it snowballed into a larger project that will impact our entire community. So that's JA grants in a nutshell. Happy to answer questions, though. I think Carla will go first and then we'll go to questions. Amy, is that right?
No, they can ask questions now, Annie.
Great. I'm happy to answer any questions.
And thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to see how this program's grown over the years.
Well, I have to say, when I started in this role, Amy was my supervisor. She was when I was in the role, and she really encouraged me actually to look into the microgrant model. So a lot of credit to Amy for that creativity and innovativeness as well. It really bubbled into much more than we thought it could. So
that's wonderful that it's been so successful. Does anyone have questions for Annie? And also, if we think of questions later, I know where to find Annie and Carla, so we can send questions off to them at another time as well, if other things pop up. Okay, I'm not seeing much in the chat at the moment. So let's move on to Carla and we can always come back.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all. So Amy was not my supervisor when she was here in Atlanta, but I am in her old office. So I feel like I have some of that Amy vibe with me at all times, which is really important. It keeps me focused on the process because that's really important. That was Amy's key word for her while she was with us. It was always about the process. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So there, can everybody see it okay? Yay. Okay, there we go. All better. I oversee an initiative that's currently called Making Jewish Places, and it is our relational engagement arm, or one of the arms that we use. It is a hyper-local, neighborhood-based program that we use to engage individuals and organizations that maybe are lacking in resources. So the initial iteration of Making Jewish Places started out specifically for what we called the decentralized areas of Atlanta, and really focused on those smaller neighborhoods, more of the suburbs that really wanted more Jewish programming and didn't have access. The geography in Atlanta is very diverse. It's there's a lot of urban sprawl, and I think that's true of a lot of areas. And nationally, in Jewish geography, Jews are not centrally located anymore, right? So Making Jewish Places was created to sort of address some of those programmatic needs. And that was the initial iteration of Making Jewish Places. So recently, we have, through all of our data and evaluations, realized that what connects Jews is about, various things. So we, as our goal is, we're trying to distribute more Jewish services and resources equitably and creatively, right? So the way that we do that, here we go. So we empower the individual or the organization to create community on their schedule and expand their network. into the broader ecosystem. And that's a lot of words that really mean we ask the people what they want and allow them to create their own programs. And what that does is it increases the engagement of people that are uninterested in current Jewish services that are in their area. They feel unserved by them or underserved by the existing community structure. And then secondarily, our goal is to increase the awareness of Federation and the services that we provide and that our community partners provide. And so the biggest thing that we've done is we've sort of released the geography. So it used to be that to qualify for something involving making Jewish places, you had to live north of the city, east of the city, south of the city, right? Now we've said, like, this program is available and open to everyone within Jewish Atlanta, right? We are the Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta, and we want to empower everyone to participate as they choose. And so the biggest way that we create this is by offering these monetary grants to individuals. They get $180 to create a Jewish event in their neighborhood, right? And these started during COVID, when people were in their bubbles or their pod, and we still wanted to do something Jewishly. And so we were able to give them $180 to create a program. And as COVID, evolved, these evolved, and we realized that people really wanted to do this all the time. And so this past year, we offered 3 cycles of these Gather grants. They were specific around holidays. We offered one for Sukkot, we offered one for Shabbat in the winter, and then we just wrapped up our cycle that we offered for Israel or Yom HaAtzmaut, and focused on specific holidays and provided resources for them, beyond just monetary mentorship and programmatic resources. And they exploded. And we found that these Gather grants were enormously popular within the community. And there were a lot of people in different areas of their Jewish journey that were looking to create a new sense of community, or were uninterested in the community that was, in their surrounding areas. So a lot of individuals applied for Gather grants that wanted to do some sort of program with maybe, we have a lot of families that did, that are young families that want to meet the parents of their kids, preschool class, or their kids' religious school class, or their kids' camp cabin. And then there was a series of individuals whose kids just left for college, right? And they're looking to reconnect or recalibrate their Jewish journey. And there are certain requirements, and very intentionally what we call the non-requirements, right? So we don't have any sort of geographic restrictions, no demographic restrictions, no programmatic restrictions, and it's not needs-based, right? So you want to do a program in your neighborhood clubhouse or in your backyard, for Shabbat with, a group of people, we'll give you funding for that, no matter where you live. And we tried to keep things very simple. We've issued, so this is the new iteration, right? So this year, we're going to offer them 4 times. Each quarter, we decided to make them seasonal because we don't want people to feel constricted or restricted by, oh, I don't want to do it for Hanukkah because it's really busy. I'd rather do it for Shabbat. But what we found through our evaluations is people wanted to know ahead of time, right? When were you going to offer them next? Because I can't do it now because I'm really busy, but I want to do it, whenever you offer them next. And you can sort of see that these are, it's a little bit of an off cycle this year because we're trying to base them on the calendar year, as opposed to the fiscal year. And I don't know if your organization runs on a fiscal year, but fiscal years are very confusing, outward facing. So we decided to offer this on a calendar year, and we'll work it out on the back end. The other piece that I think is really important to talk about is that we rely a lot on our internal partnerships for both deepening that level of engagement and also in helping us amplify when these are available. We initially were getting, when we first started these, we would get 30 microgrants, or 30 gather grant requests. And for our Shabbat cycle, we had 170 requests for gather grants. And so it's sort of, the program has evolved and gotten very large. And we wanted to make sure that it was at an appropriate scale that we could handle internally. And also, the biggest problem to have would be to, oversaturate the market with Jewish programming, which we have not done. So that's sort of where we're at with that. And then I'm going to share a little bit of the data from that. So this is the data that we acquired on our Shabbat gather grant cycle, which was our largest cycle. We received 164 applications, 157 of them were approved. And this is the most exciting data that we, and so we assumed that ladder of engagement, people would attend a gather grant and then decide to host. It turns out that was not accurate. People are willing to host without having attended. So of the individuals that asked to host, 75% was their first time ever hosting a gather grant. We have 25% that are repeating, but here's the 77% of the individuals that hosted a gather grant had never attended a gather grant function before. And then over here of our sort of repeat hosts, these are the ones that have done it multiple times. And, we've had a lot of discussions over what we would want or what we're going to ask from our repeat hosts and how to turn them into super hosts or ambassadors or things like that. But the most exciting piece is that, every time we've offered these, we find new people that are figuring out ways to engage in Jewish Atlanta in a authentic, organic way. They're creating the program. There's no restrictions, right? So if you're going to do Shabbat dinner, it doesn't matter if you light the candles, right? Like whatever it is to you, that we want them to have a meaningful Jewish experience. So with that being said, what does that mean, right? What does a meaningful Jewish experience? We have 4 requirements to do a gather grant and 1 request, right? So it's not mandatory. We ask them to fill out, it's an 8-question application. It's a lot of, it's really hard questions like, what's your name? What neighborhood do you live in? Those are and what do you want to do, right? So we ask them to tell us a little bit about themselves. Tell us about your family, right? So, and the things that they provide, the information that they provide is really informative, and it helps inform a lot of programmatic decisions for areas outside of just making Jewish places. So they fill out this application, and then we say we'd like for people to have a minimum of 10 people attend their gather grant. So we get gather grants that have, our average gather grant is about 15 to 20 people. The number of individuals attending tends to vary based on what cycle we've offered. We had very large Sukkot gather grants, smaller ones for Shabbat, right? If the money doesn't go as far when you're doing something for dinner as opposed to a snack or come meet me in the sukkah. So we want them to fill out a survey, a summary after their program. How did it go? What did you do? How many people were able to come? And it was really interesting to watch the evolution of these, what did you learn type of questions. because right after the pandemic, people said things, as people were starting to gather again, like we didn't have enough napkins, we ran out of cups. And now we get things like, but this wasn't as hard as we thought it was going to be. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed, having people over at the house. I forgot how much fun it is to entertain. And then the last thing we asked them to do is we asked them to ask the participants, the people that attend, to fill out a quick 3-question, it's a net responder survey. And it's sort of like after you get your food from DoorDash and they ask for how many smiley faces, right? It's what's the last name of the person whose event you attended? Do you feel more connected to the Jewish community after attending this event? And if you want to hear about our next cycle of Gather Grants, give us your email. And then we recently added 2 additional optional questions to that. One is there anything else you want to tell us? And we started asking people to attach pictures. Now, those questions obviously are not required, but when I tell you, we get the most beautiful testimonials and pictures from the participant surveys, because when I ask you to smile, because I'm going to take your picture, everyone, I have to take this picture for Federation. Okay, cheese. And you get sort of this very, staged picture. It's very different than if I'm taking a selfie with my friends at book club, right? Or at dinner, or my parents are taking my picture. And also we get very honest information from our participants. I finally feel like I'm part of the Jewish community. I didn't have anywhere to go for this, for this holiday. And it was, I was so honored to be invited. I'd never met anybody at, my kids' summer camp before. And now I feel like I know all the parents. And it's really very touching and very meaningful to hear from the participants. Then we request that the hosts post on social media if they participate in social media. They post on Facebook, they post on Instagram, and tag tag Federation, or we're now going to ask them to share the link for the Gather Grants page. And that's optional. People are very sensitive about what they post, how they post, if they post. So we've sort of evolved that, and we've made that really an optional opportunity. So this was really interesting. We were wanting to get some data about how people heard about the program. And we deployed a pretty large distribution campaign with print media to see what that would do, because we really had no idea something that Federation is challenged with. How do we engage the unengaged? They're not already in our ecosystem. They're not in our databases and following our social media. So how do we get to them? How do we find them? So we've deployed a lot of different marketing tactics. And the biggest, or the most, I should say, the most expensive was this massive postcard campaign where we printed 20,000 postcards. We sent them to 17 different zip codes throughout, sort of the greater Atlanta area. And then we targeted very specific areas and did ad buys on social media to see, we sort of see how we were doing. And we were able to, with social media, we were able to adjust those depending on where the amount of applications were coming from. We were getting a lot of applications from in town. Then we, sort of targeted, we moved the pins on social media to drop in other locations. And so that was really interesting. It's sort of an interesting experiment, and we were lucky to have the funding to be able to try that out. And you can see that our biggest numbers here are from friends and family and from social media. Even after using that, 20,000 postcards, it got us 2% of individuals. So it sort of shows you the like hyper local nature of Gather Grants in general. And with this last cycle with Shabbat Gather Grants, and also for Yom Ha'atzmaut, we realized that something that was sort of a gap for us was we never got to meet the hosts because everything was done over email, or they submitted their application online. We emailed with them online. So we sort of decided, we tried it out for Sukkot, and we really expanded it during Shabbat. We offered this sort of incentive of a pickup, right? So we could give them a $200 gather grant and never see them, or we could give them a $180 gather grant and then ask them to pick up some sort of, exciting swag from different locations. And we staffed those locations. And for Shabbat, we offered a Georgia-shaped challah board, which I have right here. Hold on, let me grab it. I meant to do that before the call. But we offered a fun Georgia-shaped challah board that had like a, We Are Jewish ATL band on it. And asked people if they wanted to pick it up. This is where we would be and when. And we staffed it with our internal team, and got to meet the hosts and actually face-to-face interact with them. And 56% of our hosts for Shabbat opted in. We had no idea if people were going to show up, right? We had 87 people sign up to receive challah boards. We had 4 locations throughout the city on different times and different nights. And they picked up their incentive. And we asked them with that, right, take a picture. We gave them ideas on what to do with it. Use it for challah, use it for charcuterie, use it for marshmallows to make s'mores for Havdalah, have everyone sign the back of it. And one of the reasons we did that, we sort of said, show off your Jewish ATL, is that we wanted to show the hosts and really the community that we were open to all different types and levels of observance. If you aren't Shabbat observant, you could take pictures and write on the back of the challah board. If you are, then you can use it as XYZ, right? So we did that sort of subtly through our suggestions, but it's a very much an awareness approach, because we want people to see that we really aren't dictating any type of engagement opportunity. We really just want them to be together and do something that's meaningful to them. It doesn't matter to us how they are observing these different things. We also partnered with both Lador Vador, which is an internal innovation initiative. It's not internal, it's one of our innovation initiatives that rehomes use Judaica. And we asked the hosts if they were missing any items to help enhance their holidays, right? So do you need candlesticks? Do you need a Kiddush cup? Do you need, a Havdalah set? And we were able to rehome 85 pieces of Judaica through Lador Vador, which is an incredible organization that you should totally find out more about because it's amazing. And then also we partnered with PJ Library here and asked the host if they needed any Shabbat appropriate PJ Library books for their kids. And then when they picked up their challah board, they were also able to opt into these other things. So here's our data, and we're still refining. One of my goals for this next cycle as we sort of relaunch is working on those evaluation metrics to make sure that we can maybe mine a little bit more of that data. 30% of our gather grantees identify as interfaith. 67% are raising children under the age of 12. 57% are between the ages of 21 and 40. And 59% live in what we call a decentralized area of Atlanta. And then these were the top neighborhoods. So what this allowed us to do, this data, is convince our donor base to release the geography, right? We said, we're still hitting those areas that are looking for more programmatic opportunities, but also in Toco Hills, which is Druid Hills, is a very observant area of Atlanta. Most of the individuals that live in that area are Shabbat observant and Orthodox. And if you're not that and you live in that area, you're looking for a Jewish community. And so being able to measure what it means to be engaged Jewishly is something that we're really working through and on. So of course I have to show you pictures because it's amazing and I love them all. This is just a sample of what people did and how they posted and sort of an option. You could see the diversity in the type of person, the age of the person, and the different gatherings. And then we also offer organizational grants, which is the initial iteration of Making Jewish Places was organizational and community-wide grants only. And I'm not going to talk as much about these because they're a little bit easier to absorb and understand. We also offer a split cycle similar to Jewish Abilities Atlanta, and we offer these organizational grants and community-wide grants to encourage collaboration and innovation within these smaller areas. So it allows them to try new things. If you are a small or medium-sized synagogue, you don't have as much, or as many resources to be innovative and to try different things. And a community-wide grant is, for an example of that, is our film festival this year, which traditionally stays sort of in town and contained. Put a satellite location in one of the suburbs and offered 10 of their movies over 4 days through that. The movie theaters in the suburbs only seat 80 people, as opposed to in town where it's up to 120. So they're not able to meet to hit their budgets unless we were able to assist them. So that's what we did. And then this is my last slide, I promise. This is sort of our path to progress with the initiative, is where we feel like we're the top of the funnel. We're able to sort of bring people into Federation by doing, these very engagement driven or organic opportunities. And it allows them to become more familiar with what we offer as a Federation or as Jewish Atlanta. I use the official funnel on the slide, but really I see it more of a beer pong approach, where you sort of take your ping pong ball that's Making Jewish Places and you bop it into whatever demographic you currently fit in. And then maybe as you evolve and as your kids grow, or as you, age within the community, you sort of bop yourself into another area. So that's it. That's Making Jewish Places sort of in a nutshell. I'm gonna stop sharing, I think. There we go. Okay, so that's the initiative, and I was not monitoring the chat. So Amy, you get to tell me what people are asking.
Okay, Carla, we got a lot of questions, and what I really love about that funnel is you had such a diverse range of organizations in terms of the populations that they're working with, from smaller children with PJ Library up to Age Well Atlanta, which is working with older adults. That's really wonderful.
It's been an amazing learning experience for Federation, because we found pockets in engagement and pieces of Atlanta and areas of Atlanta that we had no idea there were Jewish individuals in.
Yeah. So we have a number of questions. In hindsight, would you suggest starting with a small geographic area and then expanding as you know more, or would you start by offering the grants to anyone in Greater Atlanta if you had to do it all over again?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think what I would do is I would not put those geographic restrictions on it, because it created some animosity. People were like, it allowed people to be seen, right? The people that lived in the northern suburbs were like, wow, Federation actually cares about me. But also, if maybe you lived in East Atlanta, you were like, hey, what's wrong with me, right? Like, so what I would do if we were to do it all over again is say, we're only offering X amount, right? We're only offering 30 of these. The preference will be given to those that live in, sort of the areas that have limited Jewish resources, as opposed to saying, we're going to expose this neighborhood to this opportunity first. But with that being said, it did allow us to gather all of this information. We just happened to have a donor base that was exceptionally understanding of what we were trying to do.
Great, thank you. Next question, can an organization or individual apply for more than one grant per year and per cycle?
So the organizations can apply for each cycle. Those grants are programmatic, right? So if you want to do a Purim Carnival and a Sukkot experience, that's fine. We just ask that you're doing it in collaboration with different audiences. For Gather grants, we do have those repeat hosts, the people that like to do it each time. And depending on where they live, it really doesn't, we care and don't care about the audience, right? If you live in a really heavily Jewish area and you're inviting the same people every time, you're less likely to get that Gather grant than if you live in what we call, in a really rural area of Atlanta or in the suburbs, that maybe this is your only opportunity for engagement Jewishly, because the nearest synagogue is 25 miles away or 30 miles away.
Okay, great. Do you have a sense of what percentage of the folks you're engaging are not currently engaged with existing Jewish organizations?
So that's a question that's also a really good question. That's something that we have been really mining, how to define engagement. What does it mean to be engaged Jewishly? It used to be, in the Pew study, they defined engagement as people belonging to a synagogue or JCC. That meant that someone was engaged. Well, we found that that's not necessarily true, right? Maybe people belong to the JCC because their child goes to this, the overnight camp that the JCC is affiliated with, and they have to, or maybe they go to the JCC just to work out. Or maybe their kids participate at the JCC, but they have nothing to do with it. And the same with synagogues. Maybe they belong to a synagogue because they want to go to Yizkor three times a year and to honor the memory of a loved one, but they don't actually engage with that synagogue at all. So we are working through a series of questions that we're going to be asking the hosts that are things like, do you have any levels of engagement with these organizations? Are you really engaged with a community partner? And figuring out how to ask that in a very plain spoken, very low barrier way to sort of figure out what that data means.
Great, thank you. Can you describe who some of your community partners are?
Our largest community partners, I would say our most active community partners, are the smaller organizations, smaller synagogues that want to do a community-wide Shabbat dinner, but don't have the resources to do that. So they get 10 of their congregants to apply for Gather grants and host people before services, right? It's brilliant, right? So then they're still able to do that type of program without having to tap into the resources they don't really have. A lot of our agencies that are looking to, I'm trying to think, like Honeymoon Israel is a huge proponent of Gather grants because they like to do reunions. And this will fund a dinner or a lunch or a cocktail party. It doesn't really fund the entire program, right? You really can't have 15 people over to your house for a meal for $180 unless you're eating pizza. But it helps enhance it, right? It helps elevate it. Maybe instead of inviting 2 families for dinner, you're going to invite 3, or you're going to say, oh, this thing in my sukkah in my backyard, I'm going to do cocktails, right? Or I'm going to do desserts. And it helps to cover those costs. And we get a lot of people that say they wouldn't have done it without the funding, more than we thought. It is also, though, that carrot that sort of, it's the incentive to do it, right? To actually fill out the application. Okay, well, I filled out the application. Now I actually have to do the program, right? Because I committed to it.
Okay. And is it a correct assumption that only people who live in the greater Atlanta area can apply for these grants?
So our definition of greater Atlanta is anyone within a 50-mile radius of the Federation building. That's the best we can do. We've had people apply from other states. And that's not the purpose of the program. And we've referred them to and spoken to other federations that where that individual is looking.
Understandable. So we will not be applying for your grant.
No, I'm sorry, Amy, you can't
Later
apply for a
on.
Gather grant
Yeah.
until
Okay.
you move back. When you move back, you can apply.
Oh, okay, okay. How did the hosts find people to invite? Was it friends or further out?
So we started out with people really inviting, like I said, their pod or their bubble. And now they've sort of expanded those affinity groups. We do have some hosts that reach out to us and say, I really want to host a gather grant, but I'm not sure I know 10 people, right? We moved here a year ago and I don't really know. And so what we do a lot of times it's our families that are asking those questions, and we're able to rely on PJ Library or our teen initiative to sort of say, these are some people in your area that would be interested in, in joining this type of group, right? Oh, you've got high school kids. Did you know that there's 8 other high schoolers that are in your neighborhood? And maybe you invite those families. So we are able to sort of do some matching, but that's very time consuming, and we don't always have the bandwidth to do that.
Great. And one last question before we bring Annie back on board, and thank you both for doing this. Did the Hollow Boards increase engagement of the host in other aspects of Federation?
So it's really interesting. I think so, because what I can tell you is that when we had that face-to-face interaction with these hosts, we were able to say, like, oh, you're a grad student at Emory, right? And did you know about, this program that happens on campus? Or do you want to get more involved with these types of programs? And just sort of meeting people and interacting with them allowed us to pull some people into deepening that interest level, because a lot of people didn't know that there was this. We did all of our pickups at synagogues, and we had a few people that said, like, I didn't even know there was a synagogue over here, and so it helps them to find what they're looking for in a different kind of way.
Okay, great, thank you. Jenny, if you can bring Annie back.
Oh, Annie, where are you?
There we are. Okay. Thank you so much, both of you. This was really very interesting, and I'm sure you've got everybody's minds percolating a little bit about how we could apply it here. And I hope that we can continue to ask you questions, that you won't cut us off.
Of course, please.
Absolutely.
But we really appreciate you taking the time and putting together a thoughtful presentation for us. And I think you've given us a good flavor of different ways that we can use microgrants, both to motivate behavior, but also to really engage people beyond the traditional ways that we tend to do in the community. And just thank you. Can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank y'all, and best of luck with your microgrant journey.
Okay, and thank you to all of the folks who showed up for this call. I know that we'll see some of you in just a little while for our one table conversation, but we really appreciate you participating.